Okay, so I think we'll get started now. So today we're going to go through biodiversity with the community. I do AQA, so I'm using the AQA specification, but it is applicable to other exam boards. So just before we begin, I just want to make sure that you're aware of any safeguarding requirements. So we want to make sure that all microphones remain muted at all times and cameras should be turned off. And if you are under 18, please make sure that a parent or guardian knows that you are attending the session. And if you have any questions throughout, just type them in the chat. I will get through them at the end because this is quite a short topic as well. So we may be able to go through exam questions during the session. So we'll just go through the specification now. So this is literally all it is in the specification. It's really short. But essentially I've split it up into 4 different things. First thing is that we're going to go through biodiversity and essentially a few definitions. This topic has a lot of definitions, so it'll be useful if you have like paper nearby to like copy down the definitions or take screenshots, because a lot of it is just memorizing, so be aware of that. We're going to go through species richness, again another few definitions. We'll also go through index of diversity. So this is a kind of equation that is used. You can get exam questions on this. So we'll do a worked example and essentially go through this all together. And then we're also going to end with farming techniques and how to balance conservation and farming. So that's all we're going to go through. That's literally all the spec. We should be done in about maybe like half an hour, and then we can do some exam questions together. So yeah, let's just get started. So first, we've got all of these definitions, so let's go through them now. First definition we've got is habitat. So habitat, by the way, these definitions come in like other topics. They're not specifically like outlined in this specific topic, but it makes sense I go through them, otherwise you might be a bit confused. So if you see these, they come a bit later or they come a bit before, so because biology like mix everything up. So yeah, we'll just go through them now. So we've got habitat. Habitat is essentially just a space where a species lives. We'll go through species in a bit, but it's a place where a species lives. For example, a cow's habitat could be a field, or like a lion's habitat would be like a jungle. Okay, it's just where the species lives. Population is a group of organisms of these same species in a given area at a given time. So an example, using the same example, it would be all of the cows in a field, so all of the same species of cows in that field in like August, for example, it's in that specific time. The reason we go through time is because if you think about it, you know, throughout the times you've got different seasons throughout the years, different things change. So it's a better indicator to talk about population at a specific time. And so that's what we do, all the cows in the field in August. Because for example, like in winter, there might be like less of them, or they might be like inside or whatever. I don't really know how cows work, but yeah. And then we've got a community. A community is all of the populations of different species that live in a habitat. So we're kind of using the 2 definitions we've done before. So again, with an example, it would be all of the cows, all of the sheep, the insects, the birds, even the grass species, everything in that field, all the different species in that one field, so in that one habitat. That is what a community is. And then an ecosystem is just building onto that. So we've got all of the living things, so a community of organisms. So again, we're using the past definition here, a community of organisms interacting with the abiotic factors of the environment. So essentially, these are all the biotic factors. Biotic meaning they're living, so obviously cows live, sheep, insects, birds, grass, is all biotic, and it's about how the biotic factors, so this community, how they interact with the abiotic factors. So examples could be, so all of the organisms, and then how it interacts with humidity, water, sunlight, so like light intensity, like wind intensity, different things like that. And the ecosystem is everything all together. So these are the 4 definitions that will be useful to know. Get them down or take a screenshot because I will go on to the next slide in just a few seconds. But yeah, these should help understand biodiversity and like the rest of this whole topic. So I'm going to change slide now. What is biodiversity? So biodiversity is essentially the variety of living organisms in an area. So again, we can say in a habitat, because a habitat is an area that a species lives in. So it's the variety of organisms in that habitat, in that area. So there's two types of biodiversity that the specification kind of briefly mentions. You've got local biodiversity and global biodiversity. So local biodiversity is essentially little areas where you can like specifically look at the biodiversity in that area. So we've got like examples, you've got a lake. So you can think about the different species of trees, you can think about the fish inside, any like insects, things like that. So all of these species, you've got a variety of them living in that area. You can also get like, I don't know, I think like a garden or something. So you've got like little flowers, all the different types of flowers. You've got the plants in this little pond, you've got the different types of trees, even like the grass species, different things there. And even parks, like urban parks, you've got different types of trees, plants, again, things living in the water, even animals like squirrels. You might see squirrels in the park. So the variety of organisms in that area is essentially what a local biodiversity is. And then global diversity is literally just like the earth. So you want to talk about the variety of organisms in the entire earth. And just a good thing to know is that when we talk about biodiversity of the earth, we're saying that the biodiversity at the equator, so this line here, is essentially the greatest across the whole world. And it's essentially when you get to the poles, so kind of going this way, biodiversity tends to decrease. Essentially, like if you think about it, the poles, you've got like, it's just ice, there's no like grass, so you're getting rid of all that grass species, you're getting rid of all those types of insects that live in the grass. It's quite cold, so you're getting a lot less animals. So at both poles, but like in the equator, you've got all of this space, you've got all this water, different fish, you've got all this land, it's quite hot, you've got lots of different environments going on. So obviously the biodiversity will be greater. And just a thing to note as well, when we talk about, let me just clear that. When we talk about having a low biodiversity, it's not necessarily a bad thing. So like I said, the poles have a low biodiversity. It's not a bad thing because, well, it makes sense that, you know, the poles are quite cold, they've got ice, there's not going to be a lot of variety. It's however a concern when we say a decrease in biodiversity. For example, like, you know, like in Australia when they had like bushfires and a lot of like rainforest was kind of getting destroyed. Obviously it still has a high biodiversity because you've got lots of different species, you've got lots of different trees and plants. However, because they've been destroyed in like bushfires, that biodiversity would decrease. A lot of habitats would be destroyed, a lot of species would be like dead. So that would be a decrease in biodiversity and that would be a cause for concern. So when you're talking in exam questions about biodiversity decreasing, that is something that is bad. But if a place has a low biodiversity, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. So just be aware of those two differences. And so that kind of describes biodiversity. So the next part of the specification talks about species richness. So we'll break this up. First of all, what is a species? Again, this is definition in a different type of topic, but we'll go through it now. A species is a group of organisms that can interbreed to produce fertile offspring. So essentially just two animals that can breed to make an offspring that is also able to breed and produce offspring. So you do get things like, there are things like lions and tigers can breed to produce offspring. You can get a liger. However, that liger is infertile because a lion and a tiger isn't the same species. That liger would not be able to breed further. So it's important to know that species is only something that can produce offspring that can also have children. So that's a species. So species richness is essentially talking about the number of different species within a community. Community, like we talked about before, it's all the populations of all the species that live in a habitat. So essentially, species richness, we're just counting all of those species within that community. So we're just going to count every single one. And a way that we do this, so let's say in a little habitat, what we do is, you might have heard about, you know, like quadrat sampling. You get like a little meter, like square thing. Let's say it's like 1 meter, 1 meter. And you just take random samples in that community and you just count the number of different species in there. And that's essentially just how you would record and measure species richness. So if you get asked an exam question, how would you like find the species richness of this field? You would take random samples, you would count the number of different species, you know, do like a mean. So that's literally it. Another thing I want to go through it's not on the spec, but it would help us understand everything that comes on later on. I don't know why they don't include it, but it's kind of a different, similar thing is species evenness. So you don't necessarily need to remember this definition, but it will help you understand. So species evenness is essentially how evenly individuals are spread between the different species within the community. So if I bring up an example here, we've got two different, let's say there's two different communities here. Species richness of the first one is 7. Why? Because if we count all of these species, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We've got 7 different types of plants, right? And the other one we've got 5. We've got this one, this one, this one, this one, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? So obviously this community is more rich in species. It's got more, it's got a higher number of different species. However, when we talk about evenness, I'm just going to erase all of this. So when we talk about evenness, we're talking about how balanced it is. So if we look at this flower here, we've got one of these flowers, we've got one of these, we've got one of these, we've got one of these, one of these, or one of these, and then with the purple we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I think 16 if I counted that properly. So we've got 16 of the same species and one of everything else. So it's not very evenly spread out. We can say that this community is dominated by one species, the purple flowers. So it's not quite spread out. If we look at this one, with this we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those flowers. 1, 2, 3, 4 of these ones. 2, 3, 4 of those. 5 of those. And with the purples we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those. So you can see this is more spread out because you've got 5, 4, 4, 5, 5. It's almost like an even split. So this has a greater species evenness. So the evenness here is a lot higher compared to the evenness here. And so when you talk about biodiversity, we're not just talking about how many different species there are, but it's also a thing to just remember it's about how evenly they're spread out. So it's just things, so it's, oh wait, I've accidentally put that down. You know what I meant, it's a lower species evenness that side. So you want to kind of consider all these factors together. So species richness and then also how balanced they're spread out. In an exam question, you wouldn't get asked this, but in application questions, having an understanding of it will help you understand the question a lot more. From what I've seen anyways, from like the questions I've seen. So just a good thing to note. So now we've kind of gone through that, we're going to go through the index of diversity. So if I'm going too fast as well, please just tell me in the chat to slow down, because this is a really short topic, so we have time to kind of slow it down. But I'm going to do index of diversity. So what is the index of diversity? It is a type of equation that we use. It is essentially the relationship between the number of different species within a community and also the number of individuals in each species. It's a lot of words. We can easily break that down because we've literally just learned this. Number of different species within a community is quite literally species richness, and then number of individuals in each species is also just going to be the population sizes of each species, right? Because when we talked about before, a population is a group of organisms of the same species. So if we're counting all the individuals in each species, we're just counting that whole population, if that makes sense. So we can break down this definition to the relationship between species richness and population sizes. In an exam, if you do get asked to like state the definition, if you get asked to state the definition of this, I would recommend you go for this one, just because it's quite, they might not let you get away with this. They might make you say this whole thing. However, I think it's best to learn it as this. And then if you know the definition of this and you know the definition of that, you can break up into this. So yeah, it's the same thing. But in an exam, I'd recommend you go for the top one, this one here. Okay, and then why do we use it? Because it takes into account the number of individuals in each species. And then it also takes into account that some species may be present in smaller numbers or higher numbers. So this is just a long-winded way of saying this is essentially how we look at species evenness without just saying species evenness. So it's a better indicator than just species richness, because we're looking at not just how many organisms there are, but how many there are of each each species. So it looks like this. This is the equation. It looks a bit confusing, but we'll break it down in the next slide. So here we go. We've got the equation here. So D equals N, okay, there's a lot of things. So we'll break it down. A D is the index of diversity. The equation is also known as, I think it's Simpson's index of diversity. So if you see like this, right, it's the same thing. It's just Simpson created this, I think. Anyways, so D is the index of diversity. It's the thing we're calculating. We're going to get like a decimal number. That's the thing that we're going to work out. Capital N, the purple N, is the total number of organisms of all the species. So everything in that community, everything in that habitat, we're just going to add it all together. And we're going to do that times by minus 1. So if you had like 50 organisms in one habitat, we just times it by 49. Pretty straightforward. The small n, the green one, is the total number of organisms of each species. So if we go back to the example of cows in the field, we can say that this little thing, we can say that, let's say there are like, 40 cows in the field. And so we do 40 times 39. That's just one species. So N is just going to be one species. And we just do it for all of the species. So let's say we have chickens. We have, 5 chickens. So you just do times by 4. And then let's say we have like, 5 grass species. So 5 times 4. And then this symbol here, we'll get onto it now. It means the sum of. So we're going to add up all of these species. So whatever we calculate for each of these, we add it up, and that's what becomes our denominator of the fraction, okay? So that is essentially index of diversity split down. So we'll go through a worked example now. Oh wait, no, we're not. We're going to just quickly explain how to look at the index. So once we calculate all that, we will get a figure. So the lowest value for D will probably be 1. Don't ask me why, it's literally just that. And essentially the larger the value that we get, so if we get, 4.91, the larger the value, it shows the greater the species diversity. So it shows a greater species richness, and it shows that it's kind of more balanced out. So more species evenness. So when we kind of interpret results, we want to talk specifically about there being a higher species richness, because the value is higher, the diversity is higher. Okay, so now we're going to go through an example, because you will get questions like this in your exam. So I just got this from Cognito. So a biologist is assessing the biodiversity of 2 fields. Field A contains that, and then field B contains this many plants. The question is asking you to calculate and compare the diversity indices for each habitat, okay? So we'll go through it now. So step 1 in this is to write the equation if it's not already given. Now, I'll be honest, I've always seen it given. I don't think it's an equation that you need to remember, but just in case, because, you can never be too sure, we'll write it down here. So we've got n times n minus 1, and then we've got the sum of the little n times this. So this is the equation. So the first thing we'll do is we'll just get the equation down and ready. Next, we are going to calculate the total number of organisms if not already given. So for now, we're just going to work on calculating the index of field A, okay? Because we need to do both so we can compare them. So I'm just going to focus on this one first instead of doing both at the same time, because it might get a bit confusing. So let's do field A. Calculate the total number of organisms n if not already given. So it is given to us. It's telling us right here, 50 individual plants. Oh no, 150, sorry. So we can just clearly write down 150. Okay, so that is that done. Next step. Calculate the top half of the equation. So the numerator is literally just n times n minus 1. So what did we have? We had 150 times by 149. And pretty sure the answer is 22350. I calculated it before. If you've got a calculator with you and you do it alongside with me, it will be helpful because I'm not very good at using my calculator. Okay, yeah, 22350. Okay, so we've done that. Next, we're going to calculate the bottom half of the equation. So for each species, we're going to work out this. So in an exam, you'll often get a kind of table. So it'll kind of have species, And then it will have like number of species. So what do we have? We have daisies, we have buttercups, and we have clovers, right? Yeah. And the number of each one, I'll just write it down: 85, 35, and 30. In an exam, this is usually what they give you. And they usually have a lot more than just 3. They might have like 8 or 10 or 6, it depends. So what I like to do is, in my own pen, I add a second column, which is the n minus 1, and then a third column, which is n minus 1, okay? And then I can just work out from there. So n minus 1 will be 84, 34, 29. And then the n minus 1, we're just timesing these. So from the values I've written down before, I got 7, 140, 190, and 870, okay? So these are all of the n minus 1 values that I got for all of the different species. So you do it for all of the species in that habitat. Okay, next step. Now we're going to add up all these values, do the sum of, okay? So we're doing the sum of now. So the values that I got, so I got 7, 140 plus 190 plus 870. Now altogether that makes 9,200. So essentially this is going to be the denominator, because we've worked that all out. Okay, now we're nearly done. Next step. Again, if I'm going too fast, just let me know, because I don't know if I'm going too fast or not. Okay, next step. We're going to, with all the values, we're going to fill in and complete the equation. So we've got the numerator. We wrote it down before. It's 22350. And what we just worked out right now was 9,200. So we're just going to put that in the table. In the equation, sorry. So in the calculator, it says, just give me a sec. It says 2.4293, blah, 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 blah. You can round it down to, I like to do 3 significant figures, just because in a lot of questions, it's just like the standard to kind of go for. You can do 2. I have seen that you can essentially just write 2. They let you get away with that, but I feel like it's safer just to do 3. But it's up to you. So let's say that this field A is 2.43. That's the diversity index, okay? So we've worked out one. Now we have to work out the second one. So I'm going to let you guys do it. I'll write down the steps on the thing. So obviously first we're going to calculate n. Then we're going to calculate n minus 1. Then we're going to calculate n minus 1. So with that, I'll just write a little table. So I'll just have little species here. And then we'll have n, 8 minus 1, like that. Okay, so we've got daisies, buttercups, and clovers. And how many are there? There's 55, 45, and 50. So I'll let you guys work that by yourself. Oh. And then after that, we're just going to kind of just work out the whole equation. So you're just going to work out D after that. No, we're going to do the sum, sorry. The sum of them all. So work out the sum, and then we're just going to work out D from that by using this and by using this, okay? So I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that. It shouldn't take too long, because a lot of it is given to you in the question. And like we already know the first half is going to be the same as before because we've got the same amount. But just get a calculator and do that. In the meantime, I'll just send my feedback form in the chat. Yeah, if you can just get along with that really quickly. Okay, so I've put the feedback form in the chat. Just get along, just do it when you get time. You don't have to do it now. It's just I was told to just put it in. So hopefully you should have gotten some answers for that. So I'll just fill them in now. So N is 150, it says in the question, and 150 times 149 is going to be the exact same as before. So you got 22350. And now we're going to work out all of the N minus 1 things. So each species. So we've got 54, 44, and 49. And with the calculator stuff that I've written before, I got 2970, 1980, and 2450. And the sum of all that, I got 7,400. And then if we put that into our calculator, got something like this. So did you get 3.0202 blah blah blah? And then if we kind of round it, 3.02. So we kind of have the same for both. So if we had the top one was, no, it was 2.43 and 3.02. So those are the two values that we got, okay? Now the last thing we need to do is the question states calculate, which we did, but now we need to compare these. So how are we going to compare them? We're going to interpret the results. So next step, interpret the results. So something that you can write is, it might just be like a 1 or 2 mark question. So what you do is you'd say field A had a diversity index of, what was it, 2.43, and then field B had an index of 3.02. So just looking at these, you can obviously see that field B had a higher index, right? So it's a higher index. So what does this suggest, or what does this indicate? You wouldn't say, oh, this definitely means that field B is this. You'd say, this indicates, or this suggests, that field B, because it has a higher diversity index, so this indicates that field B would have a higher species richness. This is the kind of language you use in the exam. Has a higher species richness. You could mention it is more balanced. You could say different things like that, but in an exam, I think the marking point definitely comes with the species richness, especially if you do AQA, because this is a language they use. Other examples would be really, really similar to this. So you want to say that it indicates it has a higher species richness than field A. Okay? And that is essentially how we interpret the results. So we've done the comparison. And that's essentially how you work out that question. In my opinion, it's quite straightforward, but it's quite long. So in an exam, it would take a while. It's just to like add up all of the values and calculate them all. It does take a little bit of time. And it's quite prone to error, so be careful and check your answers. But it's not difficult, it's doable. I think it's one of the easiest ones that you can get. So that's index of diversity. The last thing we're going to move on to for content is farming technique. Oh, no, we're not. I forgot to write that down. Oh yeah, so essentially, this is basically just what I said, but you know, high value shows a high species richness and a high species evenness. In an exam, you'd focus on saying species richness. And a low one would mean that it's dominated by one or few species. So again, a low species richness, a lower species evenness. So we've just been through that, so it's okay. But yeah, now we're going to move on to farming techniques. So this is the last part of the spec. It's very small. It's just something to have an awareness of, and it's quite similar to GCSE knowledge. So farming techniques are things that farmers do to maximise food production, but they can also have a negative impact on biodiversity. So I've put 3 examples here today. So we've got monoculture. A monoculture is essentially when farmers have fields with only one type of crop. So they might have like a massive field of just sweet corn, or like a massive field of just like, I don't know, wheat. So different things like that. And the reason it can reduce biodiversity, because you're essentially reducing the species richness. So if you had a whole field, oh no, let me use a pen. If we had a whole field of, I don't know, wheat, so all of this is wheat, and if you take random samples and you count the number of different species in that field, you're all going to get the same thing, aren't you? You're all going to get 1, 1, 1. It's the same species. So obviously the biodiversity will be really low because it's just one species. So you're reducing the species richness by having a field with one type of crop. Okay, so monoculture is one way. Another way is hedgerow removal. So this is when farmers increase the area of farmland by turning lots of small fields into fewer large fields. So essentially what this looks like is you've got a big field. If you've done like a Duke of Edinburgh, you might have seen it where, or if you've gone like walking in like the countryside, you've got like little hedges that just go on for ages and it kind of splits these up. And you have like little fences, you might be able to like hop the fence to go into different like fields. All of it is all the farmers' fields, but you've got them split into different hedgerows, by hedgerows. So what farmers do is sometimes they get rid of these completely just to make one massive field. And this reduces biodiversity because you're removing the habitats. These bushes, these hedges, have its own kind of habitat because insects live there. You've got different plants there. So by removing them, you're removing those habitats. And this is similar to things like draining wetlands and clearing woodlands. So to be a bit more specific, let's say a farmer owns a lot of land. They've got all these fields and they've got some trees nearby. They've got, I don't know, a little lake nearby. They've got more fields. A farmer might want to get rid of these wetlands, get rid of these trees in order to make a larger field. By doing this, they're removing the habitats because things may live in the water, you might have different trees. You're removing these things, you're killing these habitats, and so this can reduce biodiversity. And then another thing that we're going to go through is herbicides and pesticides. So a herbicide is a chemical that kills unwanted plants or weeds. It's kind of in the name herb. And then a pesticide is a chemical that kills pests, so things that feed on crops. So obviously these are really helpful to maximize food production, but it's really bad for biodiversity. Why? Because you're reducing food sources and habitats. So with food sources, what I mean is these plants, these weeds can be food sources for different types of animals. These pests as well are also food sources for large animals who might feed on these little organisms. So you're removing these food sources and these habitats as well. These plants are habitats for different types of insects. So you're reducing those habitats, you're reducing those food sources, and therefore you're reducing biodiversity. So just to kind of summarize, but when it comes to talking about farming techniques and biodiversity, basically there's loads of different things you can do. But I've chosen these 3 examples because we're talking about species richness, we're talking about the variety of species in that area, we're talking about removing habitats and reducing food sources. These are kind of key marking points that you can get. And there are so many different examples. So, there's not just hedgerow removal. I've kind of included here, we've got draining wetlands, we've got clearing woodlands. These are all valid examples. I've just chosen these because we're specifically talking about these 3. It's about the consequences, these 3 consequences here. It's the reducing food sources, removing habitats, and reducing the variety of species within that area, so species richness. Okay, so that's farming techniques. And then the last thing we're going to go through is, change slide, okay, balancing agriculture and conservation. So this is essentially when we want to make sure that, because of farmers do these techniques, how can they do these techniques, but at the same time, how can we conserve different areas and conserve these habitats? So again, it's not really talked about in the spec, or it's not really talked about in like textbooks. So I've just found some 3 key things I think is important. So one of them is giving legal protection to endangered species. So let's say a species is like a specific type of deer is endangered. The government can put legal protection on that deer so that they can't be hunted, they can't be tracked down and killed, things like that. So legal protection will protect those species. You've also got creating protected areas. So if you have a specific type of area with like little woodlands, little lake, things like that, if you create that as a protected area, it can restrict further development. So farmers won't be able to go there and kind of strip it of its resources because it's a protected area, and you want to protect that habitat and protect the food sources there. And the last thing, there's a specific example in the CGP textbook, and I was going to include it, but it's a bit outdated because of Brexit. They like change the name of schemes, they change everything. But essentially, encouraging farmers to conserve biodiversity through various schemes. So just to kind of make that a bit more clearer, the government can kind of say something to the farmers. They can say like, oh, like we'll pay you money if you don't remove any hedgerows in your farm, or if you don't use herbicides, we'll pay you. And then the farmers, obviously, like we're all human, everyone likes money, so they'll say like, oh yeah, okay, fine, that's fine, I won't do that, and then they get paid for it. So essentially, they are conserving biodiversity because they're not doing all of these techniques that I mentioned on the past slide, and they're getting paid to do it. So this is just one way to encourage farmers to conserve their biodiversity in their farm. So yeah, that is essentially all of the content in this part of the spec. So if you have any questions now, please type them in the chat. But don't go anywhere for the next 20 minutes. We'll go through some exam questions. I will still post them on in the group chat. So if you don't want to do them, you can go. But if not, we'll do it here so I can properly go through like mark scheme and everything. So we've got 4 questions: easy, medium, and hard, and even harder. So first up, really easy. I'll give you a couple of seconds because we literally went through this on slides. You can literally write the same definitions I put on the slides. Define species and define species richness. So 1 mark each. I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that, and then I'll come back and give the answer. Okay, hopefully it shouldn't have taken that long, because it's okay, it's a really short definition. So I'll show my model answer and I'll show the mark scheme. So my answer was essentially a species. I literally got this from my PowerPoint. So like literally copy and paste. So a species is a group of organisms that can interbreed to produce fertile offspring. And species richness is the number of different species present within a community. Okay, that's what I've written down. Now if we look at the mark scheme, species, again, a group of organisms that are able to produce fertile offspring. You don't need to write interbreed, it's the same thing. Just you need to talk about organisms producing fertile offspring, okay? Now with the other one, we're talking about the number of different species within a community. That's exactly what I put. They do allow habitat, they do allow ecosystem, they do allow area, which I think is really iffy because it's not that specific. If I were you, I would be really specific and say community. They reject inner population. Why? Because if you remember from the beginning, we were going through, a population is a group of organisms of the same species in a given area. So it doesn't make sense that species richness is about the different species within a population, because a population only has one species. So if you wrote population, you would have that rejected. And then ignore types unqualified. This just basically means if you say for species richness, you say, oh, the types in a community. Like, that's not specific. I'm hoping like none of you wrote that, because you would want to be specific, the number of different species in a community. So yeah, it says ignore, because if they see that anything else looks right, they would tick it. If you're not too specific, if you just say number of types, they wouldn't have given you the mark. So you've got to be really specific. Say the number of different species within the community. But yeah, so that was a pretty easy question. Now we'll go on to a medium one. There's a lot on the board. It's literally just another example of index of diversity. So as you can see, they've given the species and they've given the n. It might help to have a little n-1 column and an n-1 column, so you can work all that out and then work it out, and you're just going to calculate the index. So unlike before where we do the compare, you're just going to calculate. So I'll give you a little while to do that, just because it does take a while. So I'll give you a few minutes. If you have a calculator, it might be useful to get it out, and then we'll go through the answer. Okay, hopefully you should have gotten an answer by now. Because it's quite a long question, but we'll go through it. So I'm going to show my model answer. So as you can see here, I don't think there's a point in going through every single bit because obviously it's just maths. But if you look here, I've got my little, I've highlighted this pink, the numerator is pink, I've calculated it here. The blue, I've made this table and I've worked out everything. And then I did the sum of it here. And then I have this at the end of my answer. It's essentially the whole equation. And I've just written it the numerator and the denominator. And I've got my answer, I rounded it. 3 significant figures, just because I like doing that, but you know, if you've done others, it's fine. We'll go through the mark scheme. Super short. It's literally just, if you get the correct answer, it's 2 marks. So they said 6.97 to 7. So if you look here, 6.97 is, they didn't round it, but whatever. They might have just truncated it and just got rid of the value. So 6.97 works. And then it goes up to 7, so you could have literally just written 7 as well, it's fine. So anything in between. And then you get 1 mark. So if you didn't get the correct answer, if you got a wrong answer, they would give you 1 mark for the numerator or the denominator being right. So that's why it's so important to have this final step, because let's say you get the denominator wrong, which is common. I feel like if you get this wrong, it's because you're doing something wrong with the adding. You might have just missed out something. So if they see that this is wrong, and then because this is wrong, this will be wrong. If you added it wrong, this will be wrong. But if you get this right, then you can get 1 mark. So make sure you check your answers so that you are getting full marks, because it's just adding. So be careful with your calculator. Do check your answers. But otherwise, that is that. Okay, next question. Okay, ignore that it says, I cut this off from a different question. Ignore that it says that. Just say, okay, a forest was cleared to make more land available for agriculture. After the forest was cleared, the species diversity of insects decreased. Explain why. So if we break down this question, it's saying a forest was cleared, okay? We spoke about this before. To make available for land available for agriculture. We literally just spoke about this, okay? After it was cleared, the species diversity of insects in the area decreased. Explain why. And you can see it's 3 marks. So you kind of want to be writing 3 different points. So if you remember from the slides, there are 3 kind of negatives for different agricultural things. So how can the forest being cleared, how does it affect the insects in the area? So what is it that insects need in the area? Just to give you something to think about while you write your answer. Again, I know it says 3 marks, but it isn't a long answer, it's quite short. So I'll give you a couple of seconds and then we'll go through the answer. Okay, hopefully you should have gotten an answer for that. So I'll go through it. Again, I'll do my answer first and then the mark scheme. So, my answer, I've kind of broken it down. So clearing the forest means that there will be fewer plant species, right? Because if you're clearing the forest, you're clearing these trees, these plants. So there are fewer plant species. And I was specific with the species. Instead of saying fewer plants, we're talking about species. Why? Because it's literally saying, why does it always do that? Sorry, it's saying species diversity. So you want to kind of refer back to species in this question. And because there are fewer plant species, this means that there are fewer habitats. Because we're kind of thinking about the insects. There's fewer habitats for the insects. You know, there's less places for them to live. And also fewer food sources for the insects. So they are not able to eat in those areas and things. And so therefore the diversity of insects would decrease, because if there are less species for them to eat or live in, they would obviously like migrate somewhere else, they would probably die, so the diversity of the insects in that area would decrease. So this is essentially the 3 marking points for that. We want to talk about the species of plants and then how it affects the insects. And if you remember from the slide that we had, if I just go back to it, where is it? 1 sec. Here. Okay. Come on, there. We talked about, oh my god, sorry, we talked about species richness, talked about the variety of species, we talked about removing habitats, and we talked about the food sources. Okay? So these three things are literally all under this. Okay, we've got fewer plant species, we've got fewer habitats, fewer food sources. And if we look at the mark scheme, they're really specific. So they say decrease the variety of plants or fewer plant species. If you wrote species richness, so if you say there's a lower species richness of plants, you know, it does, it is similar. I don't know if a marker would be that strict and not give it, because it's literally the same thing as fewer plant species. There is a lower species richness, it's the same thing. But just to be safe, you know, write fewer plant species. They say accept reference to monoculture. Again, it's a bit, I don't know why you'd say monoculture instead of fewer plant species. It's more, yeah, just say fewer plant species. Neutral is fewer plants, because like I said, be specific, say species, because they may not give it to you if you just say plants. Okay, I've highlighted niches here. I never see this in, like, it doesn't come up in this topic. I think it's taught in a later topic. I think topic 7. I'm not too sure. It comes in a later topic. Or maybe it's in this topic and I'm just stupid. But a niche is essentially like a role that an organism has, and it's kind of like ecosystem. Don't quote me on that because I'm not too sure. But you can write niches in a lot of mark schemes, and in a lot of other questions they want you to write niches instead of habitats. But with this question, because we're learning about this topic and it does come under topic 4, we talk about fewer habitats. But if you write niches, that's still good. So yeah, instead of saying homes or instead of saying shelter, you know, we talk about habitats. So remember to use the correct language. And then we're going to talk about the decrease in variety of food or fewer food sources, okay? And again here they said less food is neutral. When it says neutral, it essentially, I'm pretty sure it means like the examiner is like a bit iffy on it. Like they'll be like, okay, we'll kind of accept it, but you know what, if I don't think the answer is that strong, I might just not let it happen. It's a bit like, this isn't recommended, don't write this. It also might mean that in this question, it's okay, but in a different question similar to this, it might be rejected. So be careful. And they're accepting less variety of prey. Again, it's similar, but because we were talking about the forest being cleared, I think it's better to talk about, like, leaves aren't really prey, it's more food sources. So, you know, just focus on the food sources instead of saying prey, because it's about the plants and the woodland being cleared from the insects, not like animals dying, okay? So that's that question. And now we've got a couple of minutes for the last question. So we've got to kind of interpret this question. So we've got a graph, as you can see here. So this graph is just showing different fish caught at different depths in the Pacific Ocean. So on this one we've got the species richness, so the number of different individuals in each, no, the number of different species within the community. And then we've got the depth, and over here we've got sample A, okay? The question is saying that 60% of all the fish caught in the investigation came from sample A. So out of all the fish they caught at all these depths, 68% of the fish came from A. So one student said that, oh, this showed that sample A had a greater index of diversity than any of the other samples. And now the question is saying it's not possible to draw this conclusion from the data given. Give reasons why. So you got 3 marks, meaning you'd give 3 reasons. It is quite a difficult question. So to break it down, because it's telling you index of diversity, when you think about index of diversity, think about what is included in the equation. So remember the definition we went through. Think about the definition. What is actually the index of diversity? Think about other things we've talked about. So we've obviously talked about species richness. What else have we talked about today that isn't specifically mentioned in the specification, but is useful to know, because knowing this will kind of help you answer the question? Think about essentially what is given to you. So we have species richness. What is not given to us that we also know kind of increases biodiversity? So we'll say other factors. And yeah, just look at the different samples as well. Kind of see what does this show compared to sample A, okay? So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. I feel like the meeting cuts off at 1 hour, so essentially I'll have like a minute or two left, so I'll try to be quick with this. Okay, I know I'm stopping a bit early, but it's just because I'm conscious of time, so I'll go through the question now really quickly. So this is essentially what I've written. If I don't get time to finish it, I will just post the mark scheme. So the number of individuals of each species isn't given, it's population size. So remember when we talked about index of diversity, it's a relationship between the population sizes and also the species richness, okay? So we've got species richness, we're not given the population sizes. So we can clearly say this isn't given. This is kind of the simplest mark to get, I think. The next are quite more difficult. So other samples could have a high species richness but a lower number of individuals. So if we look here, these samples have got higher species richness. So this index of diversity could be greater because their species richness is higher and they could have a lower number of individuals. And if you think about the diversity index of diversity, if you have less, on the bottom, let's say you have like 1 on the bottom and 2 on top, obviously it will give a bigger number. So other samples could have a higher index of diversity because of this. And just another thing, but the 68% could almost all be of the same species. So remember we talked about species evenness? All of the 68% could be dominated by one species. So yeah, so we want to talk about that. Okay, the meeting didn't cut off at 1 hour, so it's okay, I'll just carry on. So having a lower species evenness essentially means that, all out of the 68%, all of them could be like the same fish. So, and we know from before, high biodiversity, a high index diversity, it doesn't just mean that there's a greater variety of species. It's also about how many of each species there are, and it's kind of how balanced it is. So if we kind of bring in species evenness, and kind of just the concept of it, so we don't have to say this specifically because you're not expected to know it, but understanding it does help you in this question, okay? So it is a difficult question, so if you didn't really understand it, it's okay. But it's about thinking about all the different types of things. So this is the mark scheme. It's a bit confusing, but I'll do it. So the number of individuals of each species is not known, okay? This mark scheme point is basically talking about the index of diversity. Includes two things. It includes species richness. Excuse my handwriting. So species richness, which is a given, and then the population sizes. And obviously here the population size is not given, so you talk about that. Okay, that's the first mark. Another mark is that almost all of the sample could be of the same species. This is talking about species richness, species evenness, and saying that all of this could be dominated by one species. So we've written that in the last one. Another thing that they've spoken about is two or other samples have a higher number of species, so high species richness. So again, if we look here, these two have a higher species richness, okay? But they could also have a lower number of individuals. So I don't think I explained it properly, but let's say that because we know index of diversity. Okay, index of diversity is the richness on the top and the the number of species it's kind of okay, it's not really in the equation, but it's something that you should just know. Let me rub this out. Oh, okay. It's not just about the species richness, but it's also about how many of each species there are. So let's say you have 10 species, but you have two. No, that's not going to work. Let's say you have 2 species, but you have 10 total fish, okay? No, okay, ignore that. I think I've started to confuse myself. I think what I said before made more sense about if you think about it in a maths type of way. So let's say you have like 100 fish of A, okay? And they're all dominated by 12 species, okay? If you have more species but less fish, it would have a higher index of diversity. It's kind of just a mathematical way of thinking. Please excuse me because I don't take A-level maths, so I don't know how to best explain this in a mathematical way. But if you think about it, because of this kind of relationship, it would overall have a higher index of diversity. That's why you can't say that sample A has the highest index, because we don't know the population sizes, and because we don't know the population sizes, we don't know the index of diversity of other samples. Okay, so that is what we say. That is basically what we wrote down here. Okay, in the second marking point. And the third marking point here, which I kind of didn't include, was other samples may have more individuals of each species. So it's basically just saying other samples may have a higher species evenness, okay? So it's a bit of a niche marking point. I wouldn't say it's something you should really write down, but if it came to you, you can say that. And for marking point 2, it's just saying, this just basically means that if you're not being specific, so if you don't say that, like, if you just said, like, all of this could be of the same species, they'd assume that you meant, when you said this, you'd assume that it would mean sample A. Okay, so this just basically means for the examiner, if they're not being specific, just assume they're meaning sample A. So yeah, that's essentially that. That question was difficult. That's why I went through species evenness at the beginning, because this question is a lot easier to understand once you know what species evenness is. Otherwise it could be a bit more difficult to wrap your head around. But yeah, that is that. If you have any more questions, or any questions at all, type them in the chat, or you can type them in the help group chat and just tag me and I'll reply. But that's the end of the session. I will still post the questions in the group chat if you want to like work through them or see them once, see them again. But other than that, you're free to go. Thank you so much for attending. Please fill out the feedback form once you get time, just so I know what to improve on for like next time, and it'll be really helpful. But yeah, thank you so much for attending. And you're welcome. Hopefully this helped. But yeah, thank you so much.